So wouldn't they rather accept silver? Wouldn't they rather accept, well, gold? I mean, for gold, I mean, an ounce of gold, you'd probably be talking, a few cows.
It's certainly the case that back in 1933, when FDR issued the executive order calling in nationalization of gold, and people had to turn that in for U.S. notes, the $20.67 per ounce, that there were full-page newspaper ads talking about how unpatriotic it was to be a hoarder and to be worsening and deepening the depression and its effect on everyone by tying up the monetary supply in that way. And that how this was people's civic duty, and the only way to be patriotic and all that sort of thing was to give up your gold. So it can be spun and wrapped in some pretty compelling language to turn even your own friends, neighbors, and family against you if you're someone who's been prudent enough to maintain assets. Can you talk for a moment about that principle of if you're like a modern day Noah and you anticipate that there's a huge flood coming and you're trying to make some preparations, that you'll actually be spun and portrayed as an enemy of the people by the officials who don't want that to happen?
Well, that wouldn't surprise me. I mean, my answer, I'll just give you a quick and short answer. That's bullshit socialism. The end. I mean, that's all I got to say about that.
Well, maybe you could tell us what you think people need to do to overcome that. So one thing is get your head on straight. You said just see it for what it is, and basing on what it is, take your actions accordingly, and don't let that throw you. What about the pressure on the populace? Do you think that will be effective at swaying group and crowd sentiment to turn against people who have been preparedness minded?
If that does come to pass, then all I can say is thank God for the Second Amendment.
This tries to be imposed by the banks, whether the central bank digital currencies. The question from a viewer, Belidan's Rabia R, says, how will silver do in a CBDC reign? So with the backdrop of central bank digital currencies being thrust upon us, will there still be a role for silver and gold in people's daily transactions? Or are you just seeing that as seed corn to basically buy your way into having some credits in the new system?
Well, that's one thing. Yeah, you probably will be able to buy your way into the system. But think about this from a farmer standpoint. Do you think a farmer is really going to trust a central bank digital currency?
I assume farmers are people who have their feet on the ground.
Right, they're down to earth people. They're not going to want to accept a central bank digital currency that they know for a fact, if they utter anything other than what the official narrative is, they'll have their account closed. So wouldn't they rather accept silver? Wouldn't they rather accept, well, gold? I mean, for gold, I mean, an ounce of gold, you'd probably be talking, a few cows. But what I'm getting at is these people are down to earth. They got their feet on the ground. They understand value. And I guess one other question would be, what will be the difference between dollars and the new central bank digital currency? Is there going to be anything backing that? I highly doubt it. So the new CBDC is going to be another fiat currency. You're replacing crap with crap. However, the crap that is replacing the current system allows more power to those that are running the show out of Washington, because they can shut you off, they can shut me off, they can shut anyone off.
Yeah, you mentioned farmers understand silver and understand gold. I did an experiment at our local farmers market a few weeks ago where I walked up to vegetable sellers and asked them, would you take silver instead of currency for your vegetables? And the first person looked at me like they couldn't understand what I was saying. But the person right next to them in the booth, their eyes just lit up and they said, oh, real silver? We said, yeah. I said, oh, certainly. Sure. No problem. So that was instantaneous recognition that silver is real and that they'd be happy to trade food for it.
Farmers are like we were 40, 50, 60 years ago. Everybody knew who their neighbors were. Today's world, nobody knows who their neighbors are. Farmers know who other farmers are. Farmers talk to other farmers. If you just had one that looked at you with a strange look and another that his eyes lit up, you can pretty much be guaranteed that those two talked after you left. So when the system comes down, the farmers who don't know or don't understand silver, they'll understand it really quickly.
That's a good point. And I think that's going to happen also among ordinary people. We've all been dumbed down so much, but people do. I mean, that's how we've survived this far in history is through being a bit adaptable. Seems like people learn quickly what they have to do. We have a question from John Roberts who says, do you think that the adoption of a Fed digital currency will require individuals or other entities to forfeit property or assets for participation in the new system?
I don't really have an answer to that, but I would say it would not surprise me, because that would be the fair thing to do. That would be the socialist thing to do, and that's the direction we're headed. You know, don't use the word equity, whatever you want to call it. So it would not surprise me if they brought the central bank digital currency out, and if you have over whatever number, 500,000, 1 million, 2 million, I have no idea what the number that they would come up with. But if you want to participate in it and you've got 20 million in assets, you got to give a bunch of it up for the greater good of the country. It would not shock me.
You've got some pretty pithy and short answers that really drive the point home. Appreciate that. John Hill asked, and you mentioned this earlier about the COMEX paper price on silver being just derivative based. He says, why do gold mining share prices seem to react only to the COMEX paper price? Why don't they react to the physical prices being paid in the world, such as on the Shanghai Gold Exchange?
If you're asking why mining shares trade the way they do, that's a two-word answer: naked shorts.
Can you expand on that for people who need more clarification?
If you go back, what, a year and a half, 2 years ago, you saw stuff going on with AMC, the meme stocks. You saw companies that were on the verge of bankruptcy that went from $2 to $120, whatever. None of it made sense. And the only way that could have happened was there was, in reality, I think, and we'll find out, history will show us this, there were more shorts than there were shares outstanding. I mean, you could go back 30 or 20 years ago and you saw it with Volkswagen. There was more short interest. It wasn't reported, it wasn't official, but there was more short interest than there were shares outstanding. And I think that's what you saw if you go back to January, February of 2021. You saw various mining shares that exploded, that went up threefold, fourfold, and within 3 or 4 days traded more shares than there were outstanding. Forget about the float, but there was more trading, there was more volume than the total amount of shares outstanding. That's an impossibility. That can't, in a real world, that can't happen. And what you had there, where you had the shorts were being forced to cover. And I think when all is said and done, you're going to find out that many of these mining shares have been, what they tried to do was short them into oblivion to prevent the financing of whatever projects they were working on. And the ones that did survive and still have that the naked short interest outstanding, those things are going to absolutely explode. And when I say absolutely explode, I'm not talking about a stock going from 50 cents to $2. I'm talking about, going from 50 cents to maybe $200 or $2,000. Who knows? There's no way to know how much is actually naked short. But I think we're going to find out that the mining industry has been naked shorted, just like Overstock.com was back in during the .com craze. If you remember that, I don't even know if you remember that or not.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. I was cracking up because it made me think about Warren Buffett's comment about when the tide goes out, you find out who is swimming naked. Made me think you could say when the tide goes out, we're going to find out who's swimming without shorts. So shorts, get it? All right. So anyway, quick last question from a viewer. Brian Conrad says, can Bill explain why he favors American mint only and why other mints and bullion is less desirable?
Yeah, that's pretty simple. For instance, if you go out and you bought a gold eagle today, or you went out and you bought a silver eagle today, and then next week the government says, we're calling in all the gold and all the silver, it would be pretty difficult for the mint to sell to you today and tell you next week that you need to turn it back in. Now, they did that in the 30s, but that's because gold and silver were actually used. They were used as money. So they did that under the guise of, we're changing the currency. Whereas today, you're making a conscious decision to purchase a gold eagle or a silver eagle. And if the government were to turn around and say, you got to turn that in, you'd have some serious lawsuits on that. It would be so much easier for the government just to say, okay, if you own bars, if you own generic rounds, if you own foreign sovereigns, anything that's not U.S. mint lineage, it's illegal. And I think that's true with any country. You want to own the coin of the realm. If you're a Canadian, you want to own Maple Leafs. If you're a South African, you want to own Krugerrands. You know, you want to own the coin of the realm.
Have we seen a precedent of what you just described happening in the past, or is that just a scenario that you think is potentially plausible?
Well, I think it's potentially plausible, and I was going to mention if you own pre-1933 gold, Liberties or St. Gaudens, those are legally considered collectibles. So if the government were to say, well, you can't have any more than 5 ounces or 50 ounces or whatever of gold, you are not considered a hoarder. You're considered a coin collector.
You're speaking to the exceptions that were granted under that executive order of 1933 for jewelers and dentists and collectors.
Right. And that can be changed. I mean, they can change a law any time. But again, now you're talking the Second Amendment again.